My name is Kylie Lodi, and I focused on third grade, and we did oceans. What we learned this week. We learned a lot about research. We researched about the 5 different oceans and their different characteristics, where they were located, and what resources they had, as well as what animals lived in that particular ocean. We also learned basic elements in music relating to a song that we learned about the 5 oceans. We also focused on beginning, middle, and end and how that relates to different things in our lives, like music, movies, dances, stories, and narratives, since we wrote narratives this week, which leads into the next thing. We wrote a narrative this week, and we included descriptive words and also focused on doing a sequence of events. With our narratives, we learned peer editing and revising. We also learned about ocean resources and ocean pollution and how both those resources and pollution affect us and impact our lives and what it would be like to not have those resources. And then we also learned the impact of salt on water. We did many engaging learning activities this week. 2 of the most exciting ones that we did were a saltwater freeze experiment, which I'll talk about later, where we just determined whether saltwater or freshwater would freeze quicker. And then we did a float or sink experiment with a raw potato to see whether the raw potato would float or sink depending on if it was in freshwater or saltwater. The main standards that we focused on this week for English language arts, we worked on speaking and listening, collaborating, having discussions, and we worked on writing, especially writing narratives, using those descriptive words and adding characters to our stories and using sequence of events to tell our story. In math, we focused on multiplication and division, and we also did a little bit of representing and interpreting data through graphs. For science, we focused on oceans, all about oceans, and the saltwater features that the oceans have. We also compared that to freshwater features and how they are different. And in social studies, we worked on civics and government, focusing on the well-being of a community and how we impact our community and how the ocean impacts our community. And we also focused on historical events that took place, for example, Columbus sailing across the ocean. For our most engaging activity that we did the saltwater freeze experiment. In this experiment, students will be investigating if salt affects water's ability to freeze. Each group will be given 3 different containers that they will label salt-free, a pinch of salt, or a tablespoon of salt. They will add water to each container and add salt to the proper containers. Students will make observations and predictions on what they think might happen after the containers of water are placed in the freezer overnight. So once the students are given their containers, they label them, they're going to put water in there and add the salt to the 2 containers that are going to have salt in them. They can observe with their group and record any observations that they see, and then record their predictions for what they think are going to happen overnight when the water is stored in the freezer. The next day, we're going to take our containers out of the freezer and see what occurred. We're going to focus on things like, did the freshwater freeze or did the saltwater freeze? How did the salt affect water's ability to freeze? We're going to talk about those things and record our observations from this day. We're also going to go back to our prediction and see how accurate our prediction was. Then we will gather on the carpet, and we're going to discuss how salt lowers the freezing point, which makes it harder for salt water to freeze, but easier for ponds and freshwater to freeze because they don't have salt in them. In closing, we learned a lot this week about oceans and how they affect us, how they are important to us. We learned the name and location of the 5 oceans, the differences between them, how different oceans are associated with different cultures, and how each ocean has different temperatures and different animals that live in there and different purposes, resources to us. Students learned the importance of the ocean and its resources. Students learned through hands-on experiments and activities. And then we did engaging activities to excite the students and get them more involved in the learning. These hands-on activities made them be able to see why things happen and excite them because they were actually doing it instead of just hearing somebody talk about it. The hands-on learning also applies to different learning styles and the way people learn. So the hands-on and engaging activities were really beneficial to our lesson this week.